No one has ever shown that human emissions of carbon dioxide drive global warming.
We have a massive power, and it's the power to say no.
They put all these words on these flyers and it means nothing. It's garbage.
We're all going to die!
Doctors are gaslighting patients.
If you keep silent, then this is what's going to happen. And they'll make us silent.
I would rather paper cut my eyelids than have anything to do with their clothes.
We are one people, one flag, one Australia.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the XCandidates. My name is Stephen Tripp, joined by Adam Zara. Now, Adam, we had a huge episode last week. It feels like a month ago, but it was only a week ago with Jodie Lowe and Professor Ian Brighthope. How did you find that one? Do you have any feedback or anything?
I mean, I think the comments and all the stuff that's been going on in our Facebook page and on in the comments say it all. You know, we've had a lot of feedback and a lot of a lot of interest shown from the interview. So I thought it was really, really good. So yeah, I mean, I reckon that was one of the most insightful episodes we've ever done. We got so much, I guess, free information from Professor Brighthope, at least on some of the, how good vitamin C is and what you can use to treat and all that kind of stuff. Whereas most people are, a little bit more buttoned up and you have to go behind a paywall or something to see it.
Yeah, definitely. I'll let everyone know. I'll let everyone know this every episode. You can head to coffee and support us there. Throw us a few dollars, like a few people have been doing, which is great and very helpful. But Adam, we've also, I guess, stepped into the merchandise world now. We've got our own official merchandise.
Yay! Yes, we have.
Yeah, so you can head to xcandidates.tshirts.net.au. We've got a few shirts up there now that you can grab and support us. And wear it around and show everyone that you love the X-Candidates. So we should have a few more designs up there. We only just set this up, so we're still trying to work out how the damn site works and all that sort of stuff. But head there, and I'll put the link in the show notes and everything if you want to grab an X-Candidates t-shirt. How do you feel about? Maybe we should put your big face on a t-shirt, Adam.
Hey, I'm waiting. I've got a design happening at the moment, so I'm getting somebody to organise a design for us, and that will be the one that I'll be buying and wearing on the show, I think, and around. So hey, if you like us, wear us, right?
Now on tonight's episode, this one's going to be a good one, I think. This guy is very outspoken, but he's also been a much well-loved actor in Australia here, especially on shows like Neighbours and Blue Heelers and City Homicide. But then COVID came along and completely changed his whole trajectory, you might say. So we might bring him on now. Damien Richardson, how are you?
Well, I'm in trouble because you had such an insightful episode last week that I feel like I'm certainly not going to live up to that expectation. Maybe the benchmark is too high. Should have done it the other way around. Had me on first, then Ian Brighthope after me. But never mind.
Well, you got to follow someone, mate. But you're being too harsh on yourself because you have written columns for Quadrant and also Cauldron Pool. So,
indeed,
and you're on a speaking tour at the moment. You want to just let everyone know about your tour first and what you're up to at the moment?
Well, I have been touring around. Yeah, I had a speaking tour, which I started doing sort of about August last year, and I called it Are We Awake Yet? And that sort of morphed now into something really more concentrated. When you start, you think, well, it's never the right time to start. If only the conditions were perfect, then I could actually start speaking. And there's I've got a bookshelf full of books that I haven't actually read yet. And I'm surely once I've read those books, then I'll be in a position where I could start. So therefore, you never start. And I thought, well, if I just start, so I called Are We Awake Yet? I knew there was things I could address. And it's amazing how much you do know from being involved in the space like you and I have, like you guys have been. And now it's sort of morphed into something called reconstructing reality, media manipulation in the modern era, which is something obviously I'm predisposed to be able to talk about because you guys obviously talked about a career I've had as an actor. People like to say, I had a career as an actor. I hate to put it in the past tense because who knows? And every now and then, that in all honesty, they do dust me off and I still go for an audition. Now, I don't necessarily get them. Is that because I've been outspoken or maybe they wouldn't give me the audition in the first place? Or is that just the nature of the beast that you go for heaps and heaps of auditions and you just don't get them anyway?
Well, if you... Oh, I'll just say quickly, if you read your Wikipedia page, it says you're a retired actor. So maybe we can play some Wikipedia fact or fiction later.
Well, that's the globalists doing a favor for me, telling me that I'm a retired actor. I certainly didn't retire. I didn't sign any document anyway, or come out and say, I've retired, everybody, I've retired. Not at all. But I think they do that quite deliberately to make it as difficult as they can for you as a human being, because that's the gulag we're placed in now, isn't it? As opposed to Solzhenitsyn's gulag. We're placed in an economic gulag where they divorce you from access to income. And so that's what that's about. Because I've had people go onto my Wikipedia page and take out the retired, and it's gone straight back in. So whatever. Wow. At the end of the day, you have to just wear it and go, well, whatever. They've called me plenty of things now since I decided to stand in this space. So I guess that's just par for the course.
Damien, have you always been kind of like outspoken? Like, we know that from people we spoke to, and things from I've read and things like that as well. If you are a devout Catholic and outspoken, being a Catholic person in Hollywood, you tend to not get your roles. Kevin Sorbo was one of those people who kind of like got dropped off the axis, and Mark Wahlberg, he's a pretty big actor and he's pretty devout Christian as well. And he seems to have gotten a bit quieter now and working, even though he was quite a big star for a long time. Did you find, were you always outspoken, or in a faith, or in your beliefs, even prior to COVID? Did you find it hard to get work because of the way you were outspoken or something like that?
Well, it's a good question, Adam, because the reality is, you know what you're meant to think as someone occupying that space in the first place. If you're in a green room, in an actor's green room somewhere, and you've got a job, you know what you're allowed to say, you know what those parameters are. No one taps you on the shoulder and says, hey, mate, this is the rules, here's the list. You know, that's why you get there in the first place, because you've already accepted those subconscious agreements that you have to make to be even involved in that space in the first place. But I had a lot of misgivings with that even before COVID, because basically it was very much an attack on white Western males, probably Christians as well, but not necessarily Christian. And I had struggled with that in a conflict. And I had spurged out a few times before I spurged out, if you like, for want of a better word, around the COVID narrative. And I'd suffered the consequences as a result of that, for writing articles. You talked about the articles I've written. The first time I wrote an article since I got out of university, which was probably in 1991 or something, that's how long ago it was. And I hadn't done it for ages. It was in 2012 when Clementine Ford was writing screeds of attack on males, how disgusting men were, and of course being published in The Age, having a column on a weekly basis, basically in the Age, because she's such an oppressed individual, as we know. And I thought, well, hang on a minute, this is totally unfair. And as I say to people, is there reasons why you can attack men and have a crack at men? Well, of course there is. But then there's an unnecessary, just hostile attack. And that's what that was, and that's what it is. Everyone knows about it. But again, to go along, to get along, no one says anything about it, particularly in the acting space or in the arts community, because the arts community will celebrate people like Clementine Ford. And I just got to a point where I thought, I've had enough. I can't listen to this. So I thought, what do I do in rebuttal to it? I could, stand on a street corner and yell out. I thought, why don't I do a repost to her, a repost, I should say, to her article. And I wrote a beginning, a middle, and the end. And I was using parts of my brain that I hadn't used, as I said, since 1991. I was pretty happy after, 30 years or something. And I put it together with a beginning, a middle, and an end, sent it into The Age, who probably had a dwindling readership at that particular point in time. You'd think, well, here's a guy. I was employed at the time on a show with Channel 7. They were remaking it was a telly movie about In Excess. So I would have thought that they would have been pretty interested to publish my article. Sound of crickets. Didn't hear a word. Not only didn't they publish it, didn't even get a response. Now, I tried to get it published in other periodicals around the place, and it was the same results. So I thought, well, I'll put it on Facebook. I'll post it myself. And then my agent got a call from Channel 7 telling me not to bother coming into work tomorrow because they'd recast. They'd head in a different direction. We know why they head in a different direction. You would think, because I was defending Western liberalism at that particular point in time in 2012, I wouldn't use those words even anymore myself. I was covering myself by definitely not saying white males. So instead you say something euphemistic like Western liberalism. So you would think I was defending an institution like Channel 7, but as it turns out, I'm not, because as we know, we don't own any of the institutions, and people like Clementine Ford can pretend they're fighting the man even as they have all the same opinions as the man. But you see, it doesn't end there. At that point in time, I had 3 young children. I still have children. They're a bit older now. And I had a wife and I had a mortgage and all those sorts of things. So you go into that recrimination where you're lying in bed thinking, why? Why did I put my hand up? And what had I done, really? What had I even done? I'd actually written an article. It wasn't like just an attack.
That's right.
Particularly as we were being attacked as men, as a collective of men, but inability to defend ourselves. And that's why we have an inability to defend ourselves. And that's why when you get to things like the COVID crisis, where are the men? The women are saying, where are the men? Where are the men? Well, the men have been attacked and pilloried well and truly before that point in time. So men won't stand up. And that they taught me why not to stand up, because they took my access from income. I rang the union because I thought, well, this is probably a case for unfair dismissal. Pretty fair claim here. I told the woman from the union what had happened, and she basically hung up on me.
Wow.
I rang her back for a few days, knowing why she hung up on me, really, if I'm honest, but I still wanted to push it and say, well, hang on, this is a case for unfair dismissal, surely. And I never received any answer from the union movement. So by the time I made it onto Neighbours many, many years later, I was surprised they even employed me again, because you go into that fear. We think, does that mean I'll never work again? Is there this secret system where they tell each other, don't use Richardson? He might stand up for men, or whatever else he might do. He'll speak off script. So I was really surprised when I got the job and got the role on Neighbours that okay, great. It's okay. It's safe to go back in the water. But yeah, it's a difficulty. And then obviously being on that show where basically the character I had to play was the most ineffectual, bumbling fool of a male. So I would get the scripts at the end of every week. They give you 5 scripts and I would just pour through them and just to look at the lines that I had to say and see if it was even possible for me to formulate these words half the time and still have any dignity and any self-respect. Now, if that's how you're approaching your job every single day, there's a problem. There's a massive problem, because no one says anything about it, because you're a gainfully employed actor in a occupation with 99% unemployment rate. Here you are, one of the successful ones, and you'll be celebrated as a result of that too. I was always curious to me, because sorry, I can see you trying to get in, Stephen. You just asked me to talk and I'll just keep going. But before you do, I'll just finish on this point, all right? It's just because when I was working, sometimes I'd work for a cooperative, a theatre group called La Mama, and it was always struck me that the actors that worked at La Mama, which basically people could be working for $2 an hour by the time they divvied up all their work and got a bit of the co-op at the end of the production, would have all the same opinions as Kate Winslet and Leonardo DiCaprio. They'd have all the same opinions because you know what opinions are meant to have. And if you want to stay in that industry and have any sustained success, that's what you need to do. But to me too, if you really are an artist, more maybe than just being a jobbing actor, so I can appreciate that, then really it is beholden on you to push back against institutionalized power.
Where is this coming from? Like, from your insights, where, like, you're talking about not being able to defend Western culture, not being able to defend men. Characters like your character was a bumbling fool, and we see that in a lot of shows throughout the years. You just look at The Simpsons. The father's always a bumbling fool, and the wife is always the head of the family, kind of the rudder, taking it, just keeping its head above water, because you've got this father just doesn't know what he's doing. Like, where is that coming from? All these unwritten laws that you're speaking of within the industry. We hear about Hollywood being owned by China, and obviously there's talks of Marxist influences in TV and Hollywood. And like, what, in your opinion, where is it coming from?
Oh, I don't think it's coming from China. I don't think it's coming from China. I think the Han Chinese take themselves very seriously, and I couldn't imagine that they're denigrating their masculinity. Like I wouldn't imagine that they were necessarily denigrating their masculinity in the Soviet Union either under Stalin. It's a Western phenomenon, and it's a modern phenomenon, and it certainly comes through cultural Marxism, not your old school sort of the working class versus, the aristocracy sort of Marxism, but it's sort of a cultural Marxism. And it's owned by all the institutions. My kids get it when they go to school. Judges make decisions based on it. And the culture is saturated with it. And that's like I was telling you boys before I came on before. It's the meta narrative that I like to talk about. And that's what I do when I do my speaking engagements. I go around and I talk about these things. Because what happens if you do keep going? You do talk about it. What happens if you say, okay, I've divorced myself from the ability to maybe work for some corporations, quite obviously, because the corporations are not interested in our cultural identity. And as a matter of fact, our cultural identity is an affront to the corporations because they just want a universalist identity, which is actually to have no identity at all. So they want open borders and anyone, and they want a brotherhood of man because it doesn't sound wonderful, a brotherhood of man, and who could possibly disagree with that, And when I was growing up, I had a poster of John Lennon on my wall. I thought he was great. I love singing along to Imagine. One day I listened to the words of Imagine and I went, hang on. Hang on a minute.
Don't ruin the dream.
No, okay. That's fair enough too. Yeah.
But I've noticed, I've said this before, and through different interviews and things like that, especially people who are in television media. I don't understand the point of demasculizing men to a point to making them like villainous. Like I think it was a point I raised once before, regarding I remember it from as a child. So I was born in 81. So I remember even once I was old enough to understand TV and comprehend what was going on, I always felt, even from back then, that the father or the male figure was meant to be made a fool. Okay, so you've had we had Married with Children. So you had Al Bundy.
Yep.
He was an ATM. That's all he did. He went and worked all day, and then just handed out money in the afternoon, and pretty much got just no respect in the house at all. And then, as Stephen was saying, you had The Simpsons, where you had Homer Simpson, who was he's just a bumbling fool who, every now and then got lucky and kind of made something happen. What's the point? Why do it for? When I look back at what's been done and the world as it is today, it was, built on the back of men. And I don't know why we wouldn't want to turn that around.
Because your culture is under attack, my friend, and they want to destroy your culture. And how do you destroy a culture? You attack the men, because it's the men that will actually protect the culture in the end, because they're the ones with the physical capability to protect that culture. It is in the very masculine nature itself to protect the culture. And if you want to have an open borders in the West, where there's no nation state, then of course you attack the men. And we saw that during the height of COVID, when we saw so many women on the front lines as far as the freedom movement was concerned, wondering where the masculinity was. And I saw the masculinity it was an outbreak of resistance to the COVID narrative in Victoria, where we manned the Westgate Bridge in September 21st, 2021, a whole cohort of construction workers. And it was incredible, and it was strong, and it was powerful, because there were so many young, virile, aggressive, volatile men. And it's wonderful. The potential for violence in men is wonderful, but we've been so emasculated that we have to think any potential for violence, is actual rape or whatever else it is. But it's not. It's the defense of the realm. And that's what these boys were doing. And it was wonderful. Why don't we talk about toxic femininity? Because I think we're probably more confronted with toxic femininity than we are confronted with any toxic masculinity, because men are almost too cowed by the system and too frightened of a system which has been in place for a long time. It was certainly there when I went to university, and I started at university in 1987. And I don't think I was the first one to have received it. No, it's been in the culture for a long period of time, and it's hostile, and it's deliberate, and it's attack on who we are. Unless we find a way to begin to stand up for ourselves, they will destroy what it is to be part of the West.
Well, Jordan Peterson talks about this when he's talking about what women are really attracted to, and it's what you probably, cultural Marxists might now describe as toxic masculinity, where you have the man, he has the capability of violence and aggression and all these horrible things, but he's able to tame that beast and keep it under control and be a provider for the family and be a protector for the family. And if there is a situation where he does need to, I suppose, unleash that anger and violence and rage upon an intruder or someone that's going to threaten his family or whatever it might be, then that capability is there, and it's not necessarily all negative. There's some situations where you do need to protect your family and stand up for the woman that you love.
Absolutely, definitely. I had a really interesting example, like you talked about, when I was on Neighbours, and I was already described the sort of character I had to play. And look, there was times when it was really good fun as well, because it could be funny and silly and irreverent, and it was great to pull a scene apart and make it work with the other cast members was there. And there was a latitude around the script of Neighbours now, because it's been going for so long that you could make up your own one-liners and stuff, and no one frowned upon it. There was no massive control on that. As a matter of fact, they encouraged it. But it was curious to me that the men would be so ineffectual. It was so obvious. And there was a real push for diversity and inclusion going on at the time. And everyone has to celebrate that, of course, but they don't see any negatives or downsides to it. But I remember one male director, a white director, I won't say his name for obvious reasons, coming up to me and just saying how much he felt under the gun. He was older than me. He had a family, and he felt like his employment opportunities were being limited by this mantra that has to be repeated all the time for diversity and inclusion. So here's this man with an IQ and a skills set that had been developed over 30 plus years of being involved in this industry, that was just going to be thrown on the waste pile as a result of it. And he would come and talk to me because he knew he couldn't have talked to anyone else in that institution without fear of some sort of recrimination. So there was a point where I got to a point where I thought, well, I'm going to go to the producer and I'm going to ask the producer, because I'll tell you, I'll give you the background to this. They did their market research, of course, because everyone was always concerned. This show had been going for 30 plus years, and the actors were always walking around, and the cast and crew concerned that this would be the last year of it. Maybe for good reason, it had been going for a long time. You can understand people's concern. So they said to us not to worry, that they'd done their market research and they realized there's still a really strong following, particularly in England, obviously not as strong as it was when Kylie and Jason were on it, whatever, but it was 50 plus women that were still really supporting this show and watching this show. And to Stephen's point, I thought that's really curious that these 50 plus women are interested in these really ineffectual, pathetic males that inhabit all these scripts, inhabit so many of the scripts, not just this particular show, but nonetheless. So I thought, I'll go and ask the producer about this. I'll put this to her and just see if she finds it startling as well. And of course, I did it with great trepidation. I'd already had my experience when I was working on the In Excess script, when I was told not to come into work tomorrow. So I've got one, the devil on one side saying, mate, what about your mortgage? What are you doing? And the other one saying, yeah, but what about your role as a male and actually standing up for yourself? What about your integrity and your dignity? And these things, it's easy to say that glibly, but these things are very difficult balancing acts to come to terms with, because it's not like I want to defend myself against everything all the time. Oh, you've said something I don't agree with, therefore I'm going into bat. But this is a deeper thing. This is a structural problem in the culture itself that's coming for all of us. So anyway, I went to the producer and I spoke to her, and in fairness to her, and I was quite surprised, she agreed with me. She said that, the thing that people say in that circumstance, it's like the pendulum has swung too far the other way, because the pendulum was great, for my grandfather when he fought, as a rat of Tobruk in the Second World War. He was just having a great time. Didn't see his brother that came over to protect him because he got blown up by a bomb from a Stuka, but he was having a great time. You see those men going down into coal mines in a cage with black faces and stuff. They're just having a wonderful time. But anyway, this is what people say. So I'm not going to, again, how hard you fight for everything, because that's how badly we're fighting, because the culture has been so sodden with this sort of information that at what point to just let someone speak and not keep digging in further and further, because that's the problem. Yeah. Once you do look down that rabbit hole, you find there's so much misinformation that's been going on down there for such a long period of time. So it's hard to know what's real anymore. But as I say, she did agree with me. And she also said, but what can I do, Damien? I have, say 9 writers, 7 of them are women in their 20s. They've graduated from feminism, because that's how you become a writer in the first place. So they come with all this ideology and all this rhetoric that they think is real, and they think they're changing the universe. They can't see that it's actually institutionalized. That's why they learned it in the first place, because if it wasn't institutionalized, they wouldn't have been learning it. But they can't see any of that. Neither would have I seen that at their age. In fairness, I wouldn't have seen it either. And she said, and I've got 2 gay men. Again, they're not going to necessarily stand on the side of heterosexual masculinity. They're going to go along with the denigration of that as well, because maybe it services their purposes as well. So basically, it's a freight train, and nothing can be done about this freight train. So I left that meeting feeling better about myself in some respects, because I'd spoken to another human being and I felt like I'd been heard. Not only that, I was really shocked that that human being actually agreed with me on some level. But of course, nothing changed.
No, of course not. It would have got worse.
Of course, it's gotten worse. Well, eventually they got rid of the show. And I thought, good, because they got rid of my character. Obviously, that's why the show failed, because it didn't have my character anymore. Then Amazon, of all things, of all institutions to come along, Amazon came along and picked it up and reinvested in it again. So it's back on the air. And it's back on the air to be part of the predictive programming. So now you see an African family in that street. You see an Indian family in that street. You don't see that Anglo-Celtic family that I was a part of. That was the traditional home for Neighbours, because that's what you are. And everyone's bisexual or trans, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You know, the list goes on. So it becomes part of the predictive programming. It doesn't even necessarily have to have someone watching it or an audience. It just needs to be ideologically correct.
I want to play a clip as a contrast to what we're speaking about. This is from 1996, one of my favorite movies, Independence Day. And it's just where they've defeated the aliens and they've blown up the ship and everything like that. And I just want to show the contrast with that. Okay, so I wanted to play that because it's showing you still had strong female characters. They were still important to the story. But at the end of the day, when the heavy lifting was needed to be done, it was men, and they accomplished the mission. They're strutting along. They've got cigars in their mouth. And it's just, when I hadn't watched this movie for a while, and when I watched that scene, it struck me. We don't see this stuff anymore. When can you point to a situation in movies or TVs these days where the men and then the men stand up and save the day, save the whole world? In fact, it was something that really blew me away, because I'm like, wow, I haven't seen that for so long.
You can't see it. You can't see it in the Marvel universe. That's dead.
No, I mean, that was a Disney film what we just watched, wasn't it? I don't know, but you wouldn't see it there too much either. Look, I don't go to see films anymore unless it's, before 1970. Maybe then I might, because I'm too frightened to, because I don't want to pay the money and invest half an hour into this movie. And then suddenly there it comes, the woke talking points that someone's just put up, all the woke talking points. And I go, oh God, here comes my lesson. Especially here comes my lesson again. Oh my God, I'm paying for this.
Yeah.
No, so I don't go. So I don't even know necessarily what's there, but I can well imagine. But every now and then you get surprised. Like I was in Adelaide this week and doing a speaking engagement, talking about a lot of the things I've just talked to you guys about. And there was someone there who's a real big supporter of mine. They're like, oh, you must come and meet this guy, this comedian. You'll love him. He's just fighting back against all the woke. And so when I got off stage, I was like, okay, I had to talk to some people. And eventually I went with this woman and we met this guy. And I met this guy called Corey White. So I'm going to go and see him the Melbourne Comedy Festival because he's doing his show. He's ran his show in the Adelaide Fringe. That's sort of the circuit they do. And just I didn't see his show because I was doing the show at the same time, but just speaking to him, I was able to speak to him like I'm speaking to you guys now with just absolute unequivocated, open conversation, dialogue, and he was able to pick up on many things I was talking about and run with it himself because he knew. So people do know, and if there's someone pushing back against that narrative, then I'm really happy to support them. And suddenly now, conservative or whatever you want to call it, neo-reactionary is the new black. We're now more interesting than they are because they are the institutions. The left is the institutions, and they have been for a long period of time, and they can convince themselves that they're fighting the man, but they're not. They are the man.
Mm-hmm. Yep. I find that comedy is now kind of like the last bastion of hope for masculinity because you actually have a few comedians, and I don't know whether it's staged or what, but you have comedians that are just call it as it is, and kind of like leaning towards like the way that I think about things and stuff like that. And I've seen a little bit of Rob Schneider's done a bit of stuff. I've seen there's another guy. He did a show recently. I've forgotten his name now, but he's done he did Old Dads. That was a TV show. That was a movie as well that you might not have seen, but I can't remember his name, and I wish I had it now. But he really calls it out like it was. So like it is. So it's pretty good. So I think that they're kind of like at the moment on the forefront of being the vocalists for masculinity.
Well, maybe so, because it's a difficult. When I finished on Neighbours, I was sort of like, I'd always been interested in comedy because I have pretty good comic timing at times. And people said, oh, you should do some comedy, quite funny. And so I thought, oh, it's getting a bit late in the day, but I have a crack at comedy. And there was amazing how many gatekeepers there were to actually police your thoughts before you even get to the point of being given a 5-minute slot. And if they think you did something last week in your 5-minute section that they didn't agree with politically, that could make it very, very, very difficult for you to even have access. And this is at a point where you're not even being paid or anything. This is just like open mic nights. So the gatekeeping is really strong. So anyone to rise through the ranks and be able to not be considered a gatekeeper themselves as a result. And you see it happen all the time. You see people go in with like genuinely funny people and they learn at a young age, oh, this is what I'm allowed to say. And this is what I'm not allowed to say. I used to see it all the time with young actors because young actors would come on to Neighbours. It was a great breeding ground for them. They just plucked someone out of obscurity that was really pretty and maybe 17-year-old or really handsome in the male's case. And they chuck them in and they just be quite honest about stuff. You know what I mean? Like, whatever. I've just come from Tasmania and suddenly I got these, let's have a chat. And I was sort of like, you'd see them learn. No, you don't. You don't chat about that. As a matter of fact, don't celebrate the fact that you're wearing a skimpy light top like you really want to wear as a woman anyway, because you're an attractive woman and you actually do want to show that aspect of yourself off, because women do. No, you've got to make out when it becomes political that it's oppression. And you should have never had to want to wear that top in the first place. And why don't the men have to wear the same sort of tops? All that sort of stuff. You learn that. And you'd see their minds get shaped by the institutional bias that pre-exists them turning up. And sometimes you just think, oh, this is so insidious and so difficult to fight against, because he's this beautiful young person, very fresh and very open, being, sullied by that cultural Marxist undertaking.
But back in 2020, where we first went full brunt into the pandemic, I mean, you're flying high. You're on Neighbours. You'd written scripts that had won awards. You were
finished. I finished in late 2019, so that might have tempered my attitude a little bit. When they shot me with a bow and arrow, was it because I went and had that meeting with the producer? I don't know. I couldn't say. It definitely was in my, my worst moments. I get paranoid that maybe it was. Other times, who knows? That's what they do to characters all the time on that sort of a soap opera. So no, I hadn't.
Like you'll read articles about you, and it's just like one line. Oh, he was ex-Neighbours, and all of a sudden he became, in the political sphere as an anti-vaxxer. And it's just one line on a page. But Adam knows, I know, because we went through the same experience. It wasn't just a line on a page. That there's a lot of it was a very different situation for us. It was very surreal. Parts of it were traumatic. But what was the process for you going from this successful career in acting where you know what you can and can't say, and suddenly you're stepping out of that sphere, you're heading into more of a political sphere, an activist sphere, you know you're probably going to get blacklisted for these actions. What was that process like for you?
Well, it's a difficult process. You're right. And I said it to you. I described it to you what happened to me in 2012, where I was at home at night in my bed thinking, why did I make that choice? You know, why did I make that choice to write that article? And then I published it myself and I knew better. I knew better. But what's the alternative? What's the alternative? I was thinking that way well and truly before COVID. So what was the alternative? What alternative did I really have to continue on with this existence that may have looked good externally, and maybe now I'd have a holiday host at home down the Great Ocean Road? And I probably would. I actually probably would. But to what end? Instead, I'd be sitting on this host of misgivings. Maybe I'd be celebrated. I might have even won an AFI award or something, and I'd be celebrated. But in my heart of hearts, I'd know I had to throw my forebears under the bus to be part of that institutionalized insanity and corruption. So I don't know. I understand what you're saying. I understand the question. As I say, I haven't turned my back on, because what have I said so far tonight that's so dangerous, that's so threatening to the system?
Absolutely nothing.
Well, but we know that that's probably not the case. So why is that the case? It's troubling because there's this cultural narrative that's been happening since the end of the Second World War, basically. Yeah. And now they've got this mantra of diversity and inclusion, and everyone needs to be included. So how does the system exclude anyone? Because the system needs an enemy. You need a friend enemy. That's the whole political basis in the first place. Well, it's got a perfect enemy. The people who lost the Second World War, the Nazis. The Great Crusade, the Great Campaign. That's one campaign you're still allowed to have. So that's why anyone who stands up as an anti-vaxxer is pilloried as a fascist and a neo-Nazi. And this was borne out to me because the day before we went on the Westgate Bridge, I was at the front of the CFMEU offices in Melbourne when the workers just said, no, we don't want a mandate. We're not taking a vaccine mandate. And their head of their union, Sally McManus, came out and called them all fascists. And I thought that's really curious, because I was out the front as well going, how dare she call me how dare she? And I was waiting for the system to correct her. And I celebrated my grandfather's war effort fighting against the fascists, as a matter of fact. He was a celebrated hero. The first time that the Axis powers lost a battle in Tobruk. And now I'm his heir, and I'm somehow Sally McManus, this parasite off the system that's been created before she got there, is calling us all fascists. How disgraceful. But that's what they do. It's not her. She's just part of the system, and she knows if she uses that meta-narrative, it disenfranchises all of those people from being able to be given diversity and inclusion acceptance. Suddenly you're a pariah, and people are allowed to pick on you. They're allowed to exclude you. They're allowed to feel righteous when they don't let you into a cafe and have a coffee or whatever else it is that they're allowed to exclude you from. And it's the whole system that relies on it. And they all rely on it. Putin relied on it when he had an interview with Tucker Carlson. He used it against the West. He said, well, why do you think I'm in Ukraine? Of course I am. Because there's an Azov battalion in Ukraine. They're Nazis. They're fascists. Therefore, the West are fascists because they're supporting them. Therefore, whatever I do against the West is okay. It's justified and rationalized. It's everywhere.
We've actually got a caller that's called in to have a say, so I'll just bring him on now. Welcome to the XCandidates, Joel.
Hey, Joel.
Hey, how are you? Can you hear me?
Good. Yeah, we can hear you. You want to make a comment or ask a question?
Questions just for all of you, but Damien as well. I see a lot of these political agendas being put forward. For example, things people haven't voted for. So, like, no one's come on a platform of, hey, let's increase immigration, but yet we see these kind of agendas being proposed. Why do you think that happens? Like, no one's ever said, hey, let's have a vote to do these certain, just an example. Yeah.
Thanks, Joel.
Yeah,
we should have full disclosure here. I met Joel at the Shrine of Remembrance when we were all standing up against Andrew's government, which was the day after the Westgate Bridge.
Well, just to make a comment on, it's because people are voting for the wrong parties. You need to have a party that has a stance against open migration. if you're not wanting open migration, and don't forget too, they spin it out as racism, because like everyone knows that I'm a one nation guy. That what happens is we say we want to limit migration or want to make migration net zero. Okay, it doesn't mean we're not going to let anybody in. It means that what happens is we need to screen them and make sure that we're letting the right people in as far as how they're going to benefit Australia, via, through working or you're not going to bring one in and then bring another 10 in just because it makes their family whole, so that's what I understand it. And I don't know actually how they just open the borders and let people in like they've been doing at the moment, especially the Labor government.
It always, when we had Kevin Lockray on the other week, he was talking about reforms that we need for government. One of the things that really stuck out for me was he was saying, when we enter into international treaties, they're never voted on. We've got people concerned about this WHO treaty coming up. It's never going to be taken to an election. He said we should be having plebiscites on every treaty that we enter into. What treaty has a government ever taken to an election and said to the people, hey, do you really want to sign this free trade agreement? Is this going to be beneficial to you? It never happens. We don't have politicians like we had in the past. John Howard would go to an election with a policy like the GST that he knew it was unfavorable. He knew that people were up against it, but he went on talkback radio every single day and argued his case. And it was similar in the Voice referendum. Saying no in the referendum in the beginning was very unpopular. Jacinta Price and Warren Mundy, to a lesser extent, went on radio every single day and prosecuted their case, and then eventually they won that battle. But we don't have the politicians of that conviction anymore that are willing to be able to do that. Is Anthony Albanese able to prosecute a case? Is he able to get on the radio station and really convince people that bringing in, I think it's 700,000 people in immigration, and I think Pauline
18 months in the last 18 months.
Yeah, and that doesn't include
it's over a million in the last 18
yeah,
months.
that doesn't include the people that are coming in on temporary the educational visas and things like that. He's not prosecuting the case. It's always just some fluffy duffy little catchphrase, and that's all they build their whole campaigns on. So I suppose Adam was right, and he said that at the end of the day, the voters only have themselves to look in the mirror because they keep voting for. They voted the Labor Party in, even if it wasn't.
See, I think there's no alternative. I think the problem is to look at it from the perspective of the politics of the day. And that's why I like to talk about the meta-narrative, because on what basis would you restrict immigration into Australia at this particular point in time when all your cultural institutions are saying what a horrible and disgusting culture it is in the first place? So how do you even begin to defend it if that's the basis of which the whole of the nation is operating underneath? No one's going to defend Australia on that basis alone, but they want to protect the cultural integrity of the country that already exists here. But if you talk to someone from Vietnam, they'll say, oh no, Vietnamese is great. It's full of Vietnamese. And the Japanese are happy because their culture is Japanese. It's certainly Israel wants to be for the Israelis alone, but Western cultures aren't allowed to be. And it's not just Australia, it's happening in the US as well, because this meta-narrative that exists. And so we're part of that Nazi culture because we had what was once upon a time a white Australia policy. And I'd love to see any politician dare even defend why it was there in the first place. None of them would have the kahunas to do it, and none of them would do it anyway, because if they did do it, their own side would use the meta-narrative that I'm talking about to have them out of the parliament by the end of that week, and someone else would take their, right parliamentary position. The parliamentary process itself, I think, is even the problem.
Well, it's all about taglines. So, as we said before, you were branded as an anti-vaxxer. I don't even know what that term means. If someone's opposing immigration, they're suddenly a racist, and I'm like, no. Let's look at this sensibly. I work in construction. If someone said to me, okay, we're going to bring in 700,000 people into Australia, I'd say, well, let's have a plan for this. Let's build some houses first. Let's build the roads. Let's build the hospitals. Let's decide where that population is going to go. Are they all going to go to Sydney and Melbourne, or are we going to diversify, decentralize them and put them in other areas in Australia and build up those cities first, build up Goulburn, build up Newcastle, wherever it might be that you target that you're going to put these people. It needs to be done sensibly. It's got nothing to do with racism or bigotry or anything like that. It's just simple. if you're going to bring in, as Damien said, over 1 million people, where are they going to go? How is society going to accommodate those people? It's not racism. It's just sensible. And in a way, you want to look after those people as well. You don't want them coming into a country where they can't accommodate for them, where rent is through the roof. They can't afford property. Prices are going up everywhere. So, you go to the hospital and you can't even get in there because there's such a wait to get in there. I mean, this is not the society we want to live in. But we have politicians that would just say, "Yeah, bring them in. It boosts our GDP. It keeps us out of recession. That's all we need that to get elected next election." That's all they.
And I was going to say, not to mention, Stephen, that normally the people who come in or migrate in vote for the government that they came in under. So if the Labor government know that they've let 1 million people in, chances are that most of those people will vote for Labor anyway. So it's buying votes in a different kind of way.
So the ramifications are huge, because when you start to follow the logical conclusions through here, it's the parliamentary process itself that is a problem. Because if the process is rewarded, as you're saying, Adam, so rightly there, from loyalty, from a group that is other than the hub culture that you're actually a part of, then there's a massive problem, isn't there?
Oh, yeah, 100%.
And I think liberal democracy is actually the problem. And that's difficult now, because you see Michael Gove, who's the Minister for State in the United Kingdom, is actually bringing in laws now to cover extremism, because the system is weak, and it is very weak. And the mask slipped from how weak it was, particularly during COVID. And it was so frightened that people were actually rallying and coming on the street in their hundreds of thousands, that the Victorian police opened up and shot at Amman protesters, where Joel and I met, and the Shrine of Remembrance, with rubber bullets. So the system's weak. So now the system's bringing in laws, enacting laws. So you can't actually point out the flaws of multiculturalism. You can't point out the flaws of mass immigration, or the flaws of even a Western liberal democracy. I mean, how illiberal is it in a liberal democracy when you can't criticize liberal democracy?
Joel, do you have any other comments?
That's all I wanted to say, was just that. And supposed to have a representative democracy. The question was just, who are they actually representing? I don't think a lot of voters care. They just have their team, kind of Liberal or Labor. That's the team I vote for. But I think, maybe people should ask who's benefiting from this. If you have a massive property portfolio, I'm sure it's great to shove as many people in a country as you can get, or if you want voters, or if you want these things, yes. But I think people should think who actually wants it. I don't think the public generally want to have to go up against 30 people to get one job. Anyway, that's it. I'm out. I just wanted to ask this question. You guys are very helpful.
Demographics is everything. Demographics is everything. Demographics is power. So the shifting demographics of the nation means that we actually don't have the structural power anymore. It's where the demographic shift is coming from that has the power. I'd like to hear Malcolm Roberts talk about that one day.
The shift of the shift of what demographics of power?
Demographic shift. Yeah, demographic shift. Yeah. Because we'll talk about white culture. We're 8% of the world's population. You would think we were more than that, and we're meant to have all this privilege, etc. But we're 8% of the population. So the world's entire population. So there's a whole cohort of Chinese and massive cohort of Indians living right next to each other. Extraordinary.
Well, if people do want to vote for Liberal and Labor, okay, if that's what you feel is best, and you think that voting for another party is a waste, but it's not like just going into the booth, voting for one of these parties and then walking away. You can still put pressure on them. Write to your local member and say, hey, I voted for you. You're not standing up for what I'll represent. If you want me to vote for you again, then you need to stand up for what I'm advocating for. And if enough people do that, you put enough pressure on these politicians.
Or I'll vote for who? Or I'll threaten you. I'll vote for Labor instead, and that'll show you. Or I'll vote for Liberal, because it's the same. You talked about Howard before, going to the public with the GST, but immigration went out of control under the Howard government, like it did every government preceding, and gone even further again since Howard, of course. He was just another part of the whole political industrial process in many respects. The illusion of some sort of choice, the illusion of being able to make it a difference. But that's all it is. Quite simply, an illusion. There might be some piecemeal things you can do at the edges, of course, that might make you differentiate yourself from another party. But ultimately, like things you say, like mass immigration, would it have been any different under a Dutton government? Instead of 1 million, it might have been 995,000. I mean, really.
No.
Pauline was interesting, wasn't she? Pauline, when she first busted out, and I would have been one of the first people to sort of think she was a racist too at the time. I was at university, etc., and probably thought, oh, that's disgusting, this redneck from Queensland. But the reality was she did say some interesting things, and she went to jail as a result. And I think that was a real transformation in her life. I'm surprised no one talks about it. No one ever talks about it. Not really on the public record. You'd think they'd make a lot more out of it, like a representative, a parliamentary representative in Australia went to jail. I think she was meant to serve an 18-month sentence. It's a significant sentence. People find it hard to get an 18-month sentence. She got it for sort of financial irregularities or something. Then she comes out. Now she's back in the parliament, but she's certainly not who she was before she went into jail, or she just wanted to become part of the institutional structure herself now. And so she's moderated her position so she can stay as part of that parliamentary process and buy her holiday home and do those other things, and probably kid herself that, well, we're better having her than having someone else from, Labor or the Greens or something. But really, again, it's just the illusion of choice.
Yeah, I'm not sure about that though. I won't agree with you 100% on that. I still think.
No, I know you probably won't.
No, she's she's pretty rock solid on on what she's been saying. She's saying the same things as she was saying back then. Maybe she's learned to focus or pick the fights that she can probably that maybe One Nation can probably win, or to win. It's like you can't fight, like you were saying before, every single battle for every single thing, but you can pick and choose your battles and try to focus on what makes what matters. If you look at what the policies were back then to what they are now, I'm sure that they're very, very similar to what it was back then, which makes it easy for somebody like me to run, because it's going to be the same kind of lineup again as it was like in 2022. So. But I think that...
I guess the demographics have shifted on her too, though. The reality is, since 1996 to now, the demographics have shifted, because in 1996, what was Australia? Probably 95%, 92% still white. And it wouldn't be now, that's for sure. So there's a demographic... Well, this is what I'm saying about demographics being power. So where does it end? Where does it ever end? When is cultural diversity enough? Because cultural diversity only ever happens at people like my expense. It never works in my favour. They don't come and give me jobs in China because the Chinese have got too many Han Chinese and they need an Anglo-Celtic guy that doesn't even speak Chinese to take a position of authority. It doesn't happen, but it only happens in the traditional white Western countries.
Western society. I agree with that. I think and I think it's just watering down, as we said, it's watering down the culture and basically diluting it to a point of non-existence. And I think that's wrong. And I think that's where political leadership, and I know you're saying that, it's not just the political leaders that are actually leading the country and all that kind of stuff. I get that, right? But that's where I think the treason comes into it, because we still, yes, we do need immigration. We do need to have people come in here and there and selected, but not to water us down and dilute our culture down to a point where it's non-existent. And I think that's where the treason is. And I think that's where the war's being won. I think you're not going to have Australia's, the young fighting fit males for war are so dilute and so resolute against Australia now. I mean, it's been taught, they're taught to hate their white privilege or their privilege at all. Even being Australian is being privileged. So, who's gonna defend us when it comes?
Yeah, this is shifting demographics too. I mean, there's always sort of like some flashpoint in my lifetime has always been considered, particularly in the last 10, 15 years, Taiwan. Taiwan is going to be the flashpoint. So how are we going to arm ourselves, and literally would we invade Taiwan? What would we say to the Chinese diaspora in Australia, who we say are Australians, who probably have relatives perhaps in Taiwan or affiliation with that country, that you're going to join up in the army and invade Taiwan? That makes it
won't happen.
Very difficult, doesn't it? Yeah,
that's
very,
right.
very, very difficult. So does globalism win in that respect as well? Because suddenly the nation state has an inability to actually defend itself. So the globalists win by default.
Well, it's the globalist plan. It's just World War III on a different level. Everyone talks about COVID being World War III, or a war of the psyche and spiritual war. I mean, there's war. The war's not stopped; it's continued, and then you're just breaking down the borders a different way.
And the things we're talking about now, if any parliamentarian was to seriously talk about some of the talking points we're mentioning, they would be painted in the media as a Nazi, as a fascist, as basically as Hitler. I'm not even kidding. They would paint them as Hitler, and that person would be removed from office, or even the ability to run for office, because in their lounge rooms, people would just go, "No, that's the guy. He's Hitler. Oh, I'm never voting for Hitler because Hitler's the worst man ever in the world, sitting right next to the devil," has been portrayed quite deliberately in the media as such. And that's what stops anyone ultimately from being able to make a difference. So people like Malcolm Roberts would know full well what I'm talking about, but he'd be cognizant of it, but knowing full well he wouldn't be able to talk about. Alex Antich, many others, a few notable exceptions are the same.
You ran for the Senate as an independent in 2022 in the federal election, and then you ran also in this Victorian State election for the Freedom Party. What did you learn from that experience stepping into the political realm?
Well, we'd been fighting against the mandates in some respects and going to the freedom movement in an extraordinary period. It was as the Bard said, it was the best of times and the worst of times. It was amazing, and to see that many people assembled on the street, and then to see your, the mainstream media actually pretend that it didn't happen, and you're living in your own country, not living in the Soviet Union, or we talk about communist China or whatever. No, it's happening in Western liberal democracies. And it was like, what do you do next, basically? Do you keep standing up here at the shrine and pointlessly talking to armed police officers? Or there was an election right around the corner, 2022. I had some supporters that were really happy to support me. We decided to run about a month and a half before the election was called, so we never really had a chance. I knew that. But it was wonderful because I got 13,000 votes by the end. And sometimes they say, "We're going to go and speak in Ballarat today." And I go, "Really? Who's going to be there? That's ridiculous." We just go, "Okay." And we'd get in the car and had some people that were really supportive, and they donated money to my campaign. And we'd turn up and there'd be 35 people in this cafe that was opening, maybe against the mandates, or still the uncertainty and everything else. Every other institution was virtue signaling by still not opening, but they were opening. And I would talk to these people, and I felt the hope they got from hearing my words. And I walked away from that exchange a better person. And I believe those people probably felt better too, and more emboldened or more secure in themselves. And how many people did we actually help not to try and take their own lives or whatever? And seriously, it was such a depressing time and dispiriting time that, and is it any surprise too that we see such a huge amount of young men choosing that option in the culture that we live in? But there's too many vested interests, isn't there, at the end of the day? Too many people with a vested interest in the system as it runs at the moment to hear a lot of things you're saying. So, yeah, the state election was I was working in construction at that point in time, so it was a difficult campaign for me. But 2022 was sort of like, just felt like the logical conclusion. And a friend of mine's making a documentary about it, so if nothing else comes out of it, maybe some art will come out of it, and it'll probably be potentially, if he cuts it together right, and what I've seen so far looks really good, potentially be the greatest role I've ever done, and one of the best things I would have ever done artistically as well, because it actually did push against the grain, push against the narrative.
Make sure you let us know when that one's ready to be seen, because we'll be
becoming demo. It'll be finished by the end of this year for sure. It'll be feature length documentary. Because I had a friend who said, "Hang on, you've been on TV and you're really done quite well. You've had a lot of success as an actor, and you're choosing to do this. Oh my God, that is a story. Now, it's a story that any of the normal mainstream media precluded itself from because it had to pretend it wasn't even happening, let alone actually use it as the motivation for creating a story. And so he said, "Oh, great, I'll do it then." So he just followed me around. I didn't know what it was going to be at that particular point in time. So now he's starting to really, really hit his straps and cut it together in between, having his full-time job as well. And some of the excerpts I've seen are actually potentially intriguing.
You
Awesome.
you brought up something I didn't know about you. Your grandfather fought in Tobruk, which is a famous Australian battle, and it was. I mean, what the courage and everything that they showed there in Tobruk, it was even recognised by the Germans. And this is a quote from General Rommel. He said, "If I had to take hell, I would use the Australians to take it and the New Zealanders to hold it." And he was one of the most famous German generals of the Second World War, and he had that admiration for the Australian and New Zealand soldiers. I'm no way comparing war to what happened during the pandemic, but do you think that some of the people that stood up during the pandemic and lost so much as a result of that, will someday people will look back at them and say, "Hey, they did a really good service towards this country"?
Well, it's interesting because the nickname they got is the Rats of Tobruk, and that's what Rommel called them. So they, with great pride, they took that nickname from their enemy and said, "Great, we're the Rats of Tobruk." Well, what I will say to that, Stephen, is that was the indignation I felt first at Sally McManus. And as I say, she was just another apparatchik to do the same thing, but she was the first one I was cognizant of to call us neo-fascists for wanting to protect bodily autonomy. I would have thought someone like Sally McManus would have been an ultra-feminist, would say, "My body, my choice," every other day of the week, except not anymore. So, and that really stuck in my craw that she called me basically a neo-Nazi. And my cohort wasn't personal. And it's the same thing when we were on the Shrine, that the RSL and, of course, the Richmond Football Club, which is just so strange, came out and admonished us for our presence on that holy of holy places. Yet that year at Anzac Day, April 25th, there was no celebration for Anzac Day because of this horrible, horrific virus that was going to kill everybody. But a kilometre away in Melbourne, 1 kilometre away at the Melbourne Cricket Ground, there was a football game between two AFL teams with 90,000 people crammed in, cheek by jowl, and the virus was no problem. Yet the Richmond Football Club, as a representative of the AFL, are calling me what? Admonishing me for being on the Shrine. How dare you? And how dare you try to use your institutionalized power? And this is what they do. This is the cultural narrative they create. So those people that are cowards in their homes watching that event can say, "I would have gone in too, but that's disgusting. They're on the Shrine." And there was reports that people were urinating on it and all that sort of thing. The only thing that urinated on it was a police horse. There was young men walking around with bags, plastic bags, picking up any cigarette butts and any containers that were left to make sure that the place was not desecrated. And that again, that stuck in my craw. It actually gave me fuel because the injustice, if you press down enough on people for long enough, you leave them no choice but to rebel. No choice but to rebel, come what may. Come what may. And that was certainly an instance of that. So however it's recorded in posterity, I couldn't even begin to tell you. But I know full well in my heart of hearts that who I felt akin with on that day, and it was those Anzacs and that spirit of Anzac far more than the corporations that are admonishing us for taking the stance that we did.
Well, I think it's a disgrace to the Anzacs anyway, because the fact of the matter is they were fighting against oppression. I mean, that's what they did. That's what they did, is fight against oppression. Okay, and then for you to be standing there at that site and basically being called an oppressor is exact opposite. See, that's where the meanings and stuff are changed, and they're trying to just get under your skin because you were actually fighting in the Anzac spirit, as you were saying, that you were being at that point in time. I remember I was disgusted with the way that whole thing went down. Not from you guys, the protesters standing there saying, "Hey, wait," you know what I mean? From the way that the police and everyone was reacted to you guys being there, and also through the media, right? But you guys were at that time true Anzacs at that point. I would call you an Anzac for that reason, just in that day. You know what I mean? I'm not taking it away from the Anzacs and what they did, but I'm just saying, like, for that day, you were in that spirit and you were doing.
It wasn't, but it wasn't live ammunition, and there was no strategic decision to go to the shrine. It was basically people were being shot at when they were in Melbourne because the Andrews government had lost control of the narrative the day before because there was 30 or 40,000 construction workers on the Westgate Bridge and they couldn't be moved, and the government looked foolish and ridiculous, and their narrative was being ridiculed openly on the street by people, and they were frightened that meant more people would join and more people would join. That's why they shot at us with rubber bullets. That's why we ended up on the shrine, because we had to get out of Melbourne. Do you know what I mean? So we're walking down St Kilda Road towards St Kilda, which is still another 8 kilometres away. And we thought, well, this is a good redoubt there, which is a military term, if you like, a position to take, a defensive position to maintain.
They were macing you guys as well as you marched, weren't they?
Yeah, there was all sorts of sprays going off, and yeah. Tear gas had occurred. I don't know if it was actually on that day, but the day before, certainly at the front of the CFMEU offices, there had been canisters of tear gas released, etc. It was an extraordinary time to be in Melbourne, in particular, the epicentre of the lockdowns. So, we ended up on the shrine. What were we going to do instead? Where was a group of 2,000 or 3,000 people going to?
What was going through your head at that point? Because you probably, it would have been so surreal for you. I can't imagine that you would have ever thought that you would be in that situation. But that's what the pandemic was. We're all thrust into situations where it's like, what am I really doing here? I know what I have to do. I know how I'm meant to react to this as a person, as a man. But you're looking around going, there's something wrong about this. This is not meant to be happening in this country.
Yeah, it was disturbing in that respect. It was really dystopian, yeah. I talked to the acting commander, Greg Hinton, on the day because someone needed to negotiate with the police because we were happy to come off the shrine. We said, okay, we'll come off. We've been here for a while. We've made our point. We're all happy to go home. Let us go the way we came. And the police said no. And I said, well, Greg, I've talked to the protesters and they're saying they want to just leave the way they came. He said, oh no, we've got equipment down there now and the horse floats are down there and stuff, and so you won't be, if you want to leave, we'll let you leave, but you have to leave in small groups. And of course everyone was paranoid by that. They said, well, we're not leaving in a small group. It's bad enough you've been shooting at us already today. We're 2,000 or 3,000 people here. We want to leave as a collective the way we came. And they were frightened about being picked off in small groups. So in the end, the negotiations came to naught. But it's interesting, I'm talking to Greg Hinton, acting commander. His name sticks in my head because I saw his badge. And he's got his mask down, of course, below his cheek, below the jawline. People half... Well, we're wearing them or not, mate? You're going to fine me for not wearing one, but you're going to take the fine yourself, buddy, because you're not actually wearing one either, and you're talking to me right now. So does that mean my spittle's going to kill you because I'm this horrible anti-vaxxer after all, aren't I? Super spreader event, because they knew it was rubbish. He knew it was rubbish. He knew it was rubbish. He was following orders. I met a woman in northern New South Wales when I was touring around, and she said to me, she watched that video because I played that video at the start of my speaking events at the shrine that you saw before, Stephen. And she said, oh, I was there. And I said, oh, really? Wow, okay. Yeah, let's chat about it. And she said, no, I was a police officer. And it was quite amazing. So she was there when I was addressing them in all the gear and stuff. And she quit not long after that. And now here she was, just in Ocean Shores, north of Byron Bay, uncertain about her future direction. Who to be anymore. She quit the police force because she morally couldn't reconcile what had been asked of her. And so here's another person you could say, well, she was like me in that moment when I chose to potentially lose a lucrative acting career or not. I'm still available for service. Anyone if they wants to give me an audition. I'm not saying I've retired. Wikipedia might be, but I'm not, So, but there she was confronted, and she's it was interesting talking to her. She felt it was confessorial in a way for her to actually come and tell me that. She felt very comfortable. I wanted her to come on my podcast, but she didn't feel comfortable doing that, which I understood as well. And now she doesn't know what to do with her life. And I think that's happened to a lot of people as a result of what happened during COVID,
It was the great shake. It was like the great big bloody bottle shaker or something like that. It's like, hey, everyone's kind of comfortable. Everyone's kind of like, getting on with life and doing what they need to do. And then we're just going to throw this big shaken mix in. We're going to mix it all up and just stuff everyone around. And that's really what's happened, because it's never going to go back to the way it was. And I'm also in construction. Stephen's in construction. I'm in construction as well. Mm-hmm. I'm on the finishing side of things with internal. And, like, you can't even read the seasons anymore. We should be flat out. I shouldn't even have time to be able to do this podcast at this point in time of the year. But now, like, you're still at home and you're twiddling your thumbs, because it's just been, everyone's just out of whack, out of order. And I think that's what they've also tried to do with this whole COVID business as well, is just throw everyone off kilter.
I was in construction too for 9 months, boys. So I feel like here we are, as construction boys talking to one another. If I was in Sydney, you could probably offer me a job, but unfortunately, I'm down in Melbourne. So
I'll get down there. I'll get a business down there one day. Don't worry.
You're looking for guys in their mid 50s to, with no skills.
We're getting towards the end now, and thank you very much for your time. But I want to ask you this question. One of the great silver linings of the whole pandemic period is that we made so many friends and acquaintances and formed groups and things like that. But how was it for you? I'm assuming you probably had a lot of friends in the entertainment industry. Were you able to hold on to those friendships, or were you banished from your name was banished and tarred from the whole experience?
Well, it's interesting. It's not the one nor the other, but there's sort of like people that you might necessarily expect, or someone will, send me a direct message on Facebook just going, good on you, mate. I'm with you all the way. But it's all quiet. No one's going to say that publicly, And then I think a lot of people maybe have had to disassociate themselves from me because it's maybe a bad look politically for that career. But then I had some really interesting scenarios where I said to this one particular woman who started getting on my Facebook page and saying, you've gone too far. You've gone too far. It's just too much. You've just departed, too far from the reservation. And I said, well, look, when you're going onto the street and there's hundreds of thousands of people gathered in Melbourne and the media is not reporting on it, there's a serious problem with your culture. Trust me. It was something you would have thought would happen somewhere else, as I've said. And she said to me, oh, don't be ridiculous. That didn't happen. Don't be ridiculous. And then she said, I'll find out. I'll see. I'll look at the ABC.
Oh,
literally, that's the mindset. So you go, where do you start? And then she said, you know what? I'm never going to use you again. And I thought, well, you've never used me in anything anyway, so it's not really going to make any effective difference to my life whatsoever. But I talked to John Thwaites, who was the former Deputy Premier of Victoria for many, many years under the Brumby Labor governments, the one before the Andrews government, okay, in the early noughties. And I had him on the radio program I was doing, and we talked about his new role as head of, sustainability at Monash University. And then afterwards, we got to the shrine, and I said, well, what do you think about, the Andrews government opening fire on these unarmed protesters? And he said, it never happened.
What?
He said, it didn't happen. We're live on air. And I'm saying, well, what are you saying, mate? I was there. I'm telling you now it happened. And he said, no, Damien, no. So we're stuck in this. Yes, it did. No, it didn't. Yes. I mean, what's the point? There's no point. Now, he's the former Deputy Premier of the state, John Thwaites. That's his response. There's no comeuppance for him. Has anyone corrected the record for him? Has anyone come? No, because there's no political will. And what I found out in the pandemic, like you were saying before, Adam, what it did to people is we don't have a constitution. We have a constitution. It's written on a piece of paper. Yes, there is a document that exists called the Constitution, but it's effectively meaningless and it protects us from nothing. Like in the Constitution, they can't stop you from going to other states. Well, that happened. There's a particular section of the Constitution that stops you from being conscripted into having to take a vaccine. They can't conscript you, civilly conscript someone into having to take a medication. It's actually in the Constitution, amended in 1946. Nothing. Because we have a globalist enterprise and we have this whole concept of human rights from the United Nations, but we don't have the protection of a constitution that you only get through a nation state. And I'm interested in that. That's what I'm interested in as a political participant, in making that argument and making those that reality part of the public debate.
The problem with putting in a proper constitution, it's scary with the leaders that we have now, because they're the ones who write the terms. And imagine what it would be. You know, it would be worse than what we've got. And that's what always scares me, you know, with when people talk about, you know, going to republic and then getting the constitution and you know, Bill of Rights. I mean, I would almost want to go and copy what America had, but you could see that it didn't even really work for them. They had a little bit more, you know, they got their own constitution that they hide behind, and then everyone can walk around, well, this is my constitutional right, and they still were getting fired upon and still locked down, and they still had all the same restrictions anyway. You know?
They confront the same problems that we confront in many respects, like mass immigration, etc. You know, and there's something about a globalist, borderless world that doesn't help for constitutional democracies. So there's no political will. There's no political will on our side in that respect. So can we change that reality, or do we have to change our expectations and what we can get from the system as a result? And what can we do? What can we do in reaction to that?
Well, you don't want to change your expectations on the system, because otherwise, if you change your expectations, you're lowering your expectations. And then what happens is you're going to end up, obviously, we're going to end up in a real, in a more dystopian society than we, you know, people ain't seen nothing yet. That's what I keep telling people. I don't reckon you've seen, well, I don't think we've seen nothing yet, to be honest.
You could be right, yeah.
You know, but what happens is, but if you expect, this is why I'm political. I hate, look, I've got to be honest with you. I'll be honest live, right? I don't really care about politics that much, okay? I had an interest in it when I was younger, okay? I have an interest in it now. I really enjoy doing the podcast and stuff like that, and I enjoy talking to politicians, and I actually do it. I do enjoy it, okay? But it's not my be-to, end-all, go-for thing. Like, I don't care if I'm a politician or not. But I believe that the only way we're going to fix it is by getting regular people in there. And that's why I have spent all my money. That's why I've put my career and my job and everything, my business, all on the sidelines at the moment, just like other people have done as well. Not, you know, but what happens is, because if I have a high expectation from the Australian government, I expect that, and I'm very disappointed in what they've done especially the last 3 years. And the more I delve into politics, the more I am disgusted with what they've done in the past as well. Okay, so what happens is, I think we should hold them to a higher expectation. We should expect nothing less than the best, and then we should make them do what we want, as in the best for our future. And I think the only way it's going to happen is by having people like us involved in there, doing what we do, doing what you do. You go around speaking, you go around waking people up. If you have an audience of 100 people, and 90 of them are your regular followers, but 10 people have brought an extra person along, you've woken 10 more people up. That's what we got to do.
Yep.
There's one thing that we know about people that didn't take the vaccine and stood up against all this stuff. They're very moral and honest people. I mean, I knew so many people that went out there and got the fake certificate and the fake thing and just went on with their lives. But the people that actually decided not to do it and lost their job or lost their career or whatever it might have been, you know that those people, they're damn honest, because otherwise they would have found some other route. But they just decided to push up and push back against it. But Damien, we're at the most important part of the show now. It's the final segment. It's called Build Your Own Fantasy Government. Now, Damien, you're in charge of the next Parliament of Australia, and you can choose 5 or 6 people. They can be anyone. They can be people that are already in the Parliament now. They can be ex-politicians. They can be actors. They can be experts. They can be some bloke off the street that you know. They can be living or dead, past and present, in other different countries. People have chosen all different sorts of people. But, Damien, now the ball is in your court. You're in charge of the next Parliament of Australia. Who would you choose?
Well, I don't know that I'd even choose a parliament. I think I would prefer a monarchy, as a matter of fact. Someone who came from my kin, someone who's interested in my cohort, in my group, and that would champion my group because he or she, but I imagine it's going to be a he, let's be honest, actually comes from that group. Not this traitorous class of people we have at the moment, this traitorous class of anti-whites who inhabit the system and are actually white themselves, but they've done a deal with the devil to continue to pay their wages and throw their kith and kin under the bus.
So you would choose a king and a queen and a monarchy?
Well, for want of a better idea, and I'm certainly open to people talking to me about a better way to go about it, but the liberal democratic process as it currently exists with it as an internationalist enterprise, because that's what it is. It's not nationalistic, it's internationalistic. And what I've seen so far leaves us with absolutely no defense. As a matter of fact, it's antithetical to my concerns and it's hostile to me as a person because of my birthright. So I want someone who celebrates that birthright and defends.
I mean, that means I would be kicked out of the country, but I like what you're saying there. I do. I agree with. I think that's a cool answer, Stephen. I haven't heard an answer like that before.
We haven't had that one before, so
it's a different take. It's a different.
That's what this is all about.
So it's a hot take, if nothing else, you know.
Yeah.
If we've got to write Adam out, if we've got to write Adam out of the country. Well, you know, it's a small price to pay.
Hey, my grandfather was a wharfie. He's, brought the stuff in, handled all those bags of asbestos that they got to poison all the, the homes with. I think. But I like what you're saying. I like that idea. That's pretty good. It's just that means that I'm long gone. That's all.
I don't know that it means you'd be gone. I don't think that's necessarily the case. But it certainly means the 1 million that have come in the last. There won't be another million coming in the next 18 months. Because at what point do you want to maintain your cultural heritage? At what point do you say your cultural heritage is actually of value? And not just because the infrastructures, this is the classic thing that conservatives do in answering that question to get themselves off the hook, which ultimately doesn't give themselves off the hook because it's really no intellectual argument at all. As they say, well, the infrastructure is not right. Once the infrastructure is right, yes, sure, bring in as many people as you want because we're all immigrants after all. And that's just to throw the culture away. That's just to throw my cultural heritage away. Why isn't my cultural heritage worth something? And I've talked to people from different cultural heritages that have said, I talked to this one Vietnamese guy on this radio program I was talking to you before, and he's a member of the upper house for the Liberal Party in Victoria, and he's being celebrated as a result of his Vietnamese heritage. Of course, that's celebrated, and he's not even necessarily great at speaking English. So I wonder how effective he actually is in a parliament that, predicated on being able to speak English. And I'm saying that's the reality. Well, that's exactly right. But he said, oh, that's great. When I said to him, what does he think of mass immigration? Of course, he threw Labor under the bus and said it was such bad infrastructure has been put in place by the Labor government over 12 years that unfortunately we are not at a point where we can take any more immigrants. And I said, okay, that's great. But what about the culture itself? And he said, no, Damien, this is multicultural. Many people come from all over. That's great. And I said, well, what about Vietnam? What if all these people came with no Vietnamese heritage to populate Vietnam? Pause. No. Yeah. Vietnam different. You know what? I agree with him. I know what he's saying. I know what he wants to defend. Everyone knows what he wants to defend. But for some reason, if I was to defend that position for my culture, I'm a racist. Even worse than that, I'm Hitler. Yeah. That's the narrative that needs to be called out and ridiculed and mocked. Otherwise, I fear for the future. I fear for the future of the demographic that is Western people, which is whites ultimately.
Yeah, let's feel sorry for all the regular Aussies, mate. That's what you're feeling sorry for because they're not even standing up to fight for themselves. Because I'm going to tell you something. It was all the Europeans. It was all the for lack of a better term right now, and I don't want to get in trouble, but for wogs went and marched the streets in Campbelltown and marched the streets in Villawood and all that.
I heard a lot of Lebanese in New South Wales. I heard, yeah,
it was.
It was different in Melbourne, but
yeah. But honestly, like it was, I'm sure that I'm Maltese. I'm sure that was that there was the Yugoslavs, the Macedonians. There was
lots of Eastern Europeans.
All of them. They all got
Eastern Europeans that had suffered under communism. Yeah,
right. So they see it and they called the bullshit out straight away. And they're like, well, we ain't going to stand this. And I had people that I've spoken to say, hey, Australia in that period of time was worse than when communism was bad overseas when they escaped it. They had more freedom still back then than they did now. So, not to piss on your parade or anything there, Damien.
Not at all.
On your last notes. No, with the last notes and what your last things were saying. But you sparked up another conversation there from your like closing piece. So thanks very much for that.
No worries, mate. No pleasure. No, I'm aware of what you're saying. And I heard that too, particularly about Western Sydney. There was a very big Lebanese diaspora that stood up. And certainly in Melbourne, there was a lot of Eastern Europeans. There was a lot of Australians too, old Anglo-Celtic Australians who probably couldn't even admit to themselves something they were really frightened of, is that their culture had been taken away from them. But when I walk around Melbourne and I see the demographics, I would have expected a whole lot more Chinese, a whole lot more Indians, etc., to make up that cohort of people that were resisting the COVID mandates, and they simply weren't there. So there is something about our racial heritage that has actually means something. And we're always told that, of course, when we have to try and find a reason to have a voice for the Indigenous to Parliament, even when they lose the referendum, they'll still institute a voice. Because you talked before about Jacinta Price standing up against, and Warren Mundine standing up against the vote for the referendum. But did we really win? Because I noticed in South Australia, and I was just there, they're going to institute a voice at a state level anyway.
They just
had
had
voted
vote?
on purely by Indigenous. Yeah. And the city of Melbourne's just instituted its own voice to the council. This flies in the face of what the referendum was about. So again, as I say, there is no constitutional defense to what the globalists want. They'll just find another means and another way of getting what they want anyway. And it happens time and time again. So, yeah, it's an interesting juncture that we're at.
Well, we need to fight for accountability. And
We've got to fight at every level. You've got to fight at our accountability, yes. What you're saying, Damien, yes, but we've got to fight at every level.
But I have people jump on my page and say, well, the people of Melbourne overwhelmingly voted for the voice in the Constitution anyway. So fair, do you know what I mean? This is just absurd. It's absurd. And what the people of South Australia certainly didn't, but they're still going to have one at a state level. So what is that person will just go silent on that because that point doesn't suit their narrative, because you know, that's not the point of the Constitution. The Constitution is, you know, you need a majority of a state and a majority of people in those states. But anyway.
Now, Damien, I'm sure people loved listening to you tonight. And if they want to follow you, what's the best way for them to do so?
Well, I can see you've put up my coordinates there. DamienRichardson.online is the podcast that I have. So you can see the things I'm doing and where I might be appearing, my speaking engagements next. And there's also my Facebook page. I've got a page called, it's a political page, Damien Richardson, but my political page, not my personal page. I try not to post my political opinions on my personal pages, because what few actors might be left, that's it there.
The one with the red.
Yeah. Yes.
Red
the red background. Yeah. Suit and tie.
Very, very good. All right. Well, look, mate, thank you very much for coming on the show tonight. I've really enjoyed listening to you. And I guess this is the good thing. Like, we don't always agree on 100% on everything, but we are able to discuss these things, and we can flesh things out and not be yelling at each other. Like
Absolutely. No, it's good, boys. Yeah, that's right.
The best thing about it.
Yeah, absolutely. No, good on you. Thanks, boys. Thanks for having me on. I've really appreciated it. It's been a good opportunity.
No worries. And thank you for everyone who contributed to the chat. Thank you for Joel for calling in. And I say it every week, please share this out, share it far and wide. It's very important for us and important for our guests as well, that people will hear what we had to talk about tonight. Thank you very much for watching, and we'll see you all next time. Thank you.
See you guys.